Hey guys, in this video today we're going to look at a new feature that was just released in Flogo Enterprise, the 2.4 version. And so this feature is app configurations, but with the AWS Param Store. So in previous video we showed app configurations with environment variables. In this case, instead of using environment variables, we're going to set the values that we want to propagate through our application within AWS Param Store. So to start out, we just need an application. In this case, I have a simple app where it's just a timer and then 2 log messages, and essentially what the log messages do is just propagates or just tells me the value of a specific environment variable I've set or some property. So in this case, the property sample will give me the default value for that, and then for the second log message, the property test will give me the default value for that. And those default values are set within app properties. So if I click on that, you'll see the 2 properties there, sample and test. They're both strings, and then the default values for each of those. So in this example, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to set the value of test to something different that I've defined within AWS Param Store so that it overrides this default value without having to actually go back into the UI and changing it. So once I've designed my application, I'm going to hit build, choose what type of operating system you need to download the binary for. So in this case, I have a Mac, so I'm going to do Darwin. I've already downloaded it, so I'm not going to download it again. So if I go to the terminal, we'll see that the actual application is there. So app config new Darwin AMD 64. So to get started, or basically something to keep in mind, is if you're trying to deploy or run this application outside of a VPC or outside of the AWS ecosystem, then you'll need to provide your access key and secret access key to Flogo. And so there's a couple ways you can do that. I'm going to show you one way, but if you want to look at other ways, I'll point them out, but then also look at the documentation on our website. So just take a look. So the first thing that we need to do is we want to encrypt our access key and secret access key because we don't want them to actually be visible to the outside world, or we don't want someone to be able to access possibly our JSON or our CLI or our terminal values and see what those actual values are, because those do give full admin access to your AWS account. So in order to do that, Flogo itself has a built-in encryption tool. And so what you do is that you type in the app like you're going to run it, and then you do 2 dashes, encrypt, if I can type, secret, and then the value of the secret itself. And so for best practices, what I did is that I actually set the value of my access key and my secret access key as environment variables. And then why I did that is because I don't want to actually type in the values here. You see it's in plain text to encrypt it, because later on someone can go in and actually look and see what those values are. So let me show you that I actually set those. So if I do echo and then access key ID, and I don't mind showing you the value of this, just because it's not the secret access key, but essentially this value is stored within this environment variable. So if I actually, let's say, wanted to run, or I wanted to encrypt that, then encrypt secret, then I would just point to the access key ID environment variable. So essentially what it's going to do is that it'll take the value of whatever I've stored in this environment variable, and then it'll encrypt that value and it'll provide me an output. So you want to do that for the access key and secret access key, just for safety point of view, just note you don't have to, so you can still run basically and connect to AWS Param Store without doing this, but I do highly suggest that you do it, just because those two token values, those 2 strings, those ID values are very important, and they give complete control to your AWS account if they fall into the wrong hands. So I'm not going to encrypt it because I've already done it before. What I will show you is how the end result will look. So what you'll want to do is you want to create a JSON file. In this case, I just call it AWS config, and what the JSON file contains is your access key ID, secret access key ID, param prefix, and region. And so the access key ID, secret access key, like I said, I encrypted it. So if you encrypted it, you need to define that the secret in all caps and then colon. So that has to be basically stated so that Flogo knows that this is an encrypted string and that it has to unencrypt it before reading what the value is. If you don't include that, then it'll just take the string value as is, and that won't actually be correct to be able to access AWS Param Store. If you decide to not encrypt the values of your access ID or your secret access ID, then you would just place the values normally, just like a normal string within the quotes itself, and you do not have to add the secret value. But like I said, good practices, and from a safety security point of view, you should always encrypt these key values, which means you should always be using these secret colon at the beginning so it knows. Param prefix. So essentially, this is how Flogo knows where to look within the param store to actually find your application, or to find the value of your variable or your property. And so if we actually go back into our browser, so within a param store, you'll notice that I have a parameter called app config timer test. The actual variable parameter name is called test. The rest of it is just a directory folder, directory structure that tells me or how to manage or how to organize how these different parameters are set up within AWS Param Store. So in this case, I named it app config because my app, his name is app config, timer because I started it with the timer trigger, and then test because that's what the variable I want to change is. The name within the directory can be anything. It doesn't have to be anything related to your app. It can be whatever you want, or you don't even have to use a name. You could just put in the value of the variable. And so here you go. This is the value that I want to change test. So when I actually run this and I change the values using the param store, I should see the default value replaced with whatever I ran here or whatever I have typed here. And you'll notice on param prefix, this is what the prefix is before the variable. So app config timer, they have to match exactly, or Flogo won't be able to actually find the value that you're looking for, the parameter you're looking for within the param store. So that's very important. And then region, so just make sure that you set it to the region that you're using your param store in. So in this case, I'm using North Virginia, which is US East 1. So I define the region within my JSON as US East 1 as well. So I'll quit out of that. Let's say if you don't want to use a JSON, what you can do is that you can also define the access key, secret access key region and param properties within basically a string in the terminal or CLI. I don't recommend doing that because it's a little bit more difficult to manage. It's a lot easier if you just create the JSON and you just define that prior and then actually just access it. But if you really want to, you can do that. If you want more information about that, check the documentation, and there's an example on how to do that. So now that we actually have all the values that we need stored within our JSON file, what we need to do is run our project with the following variable, Flogo. And basically that's Flogo app props AWS, and then we just define the JSON file. So what's going to happen is that it's going to say, when this variable is active, which is it is active when we're defining it, it's going to say look for different values in AWS Param Store. Use the JSON file to actually access the Param Store and see what the prefix is of it, and then pull those values to change the property value that we've defined. And so now the actual the name or whatever of the binary itself, and then you'll be able to run this. So you'll see that app Flogo apps props resolver is set to AWS Param Store. If you looked at the previous video with our environment variables, it basically said the same thing as this, but the difference was instead of AWS Param Store, it said env, so environment. So it was telling you where it was getting or where it was resolving the properties from. And then you have this other warning message: this property sample cannot be resolved using resolvers, AWS Param Store using default value. And this is exactly what we want to see, because the only value that we have within our param store is the test value. If you notice, I have no other parameters. So what it's doing is that it's defaulting to the default value that we define within the UI, and it's just changing the value of what it could find. So it's doing what it's supposed to do. So if we actually look at the values coming out of the log messages, you'll see that the sample value, which is the sample parameter that was the default, is there. But the test value that we changed has actually changed the output to value retrieved from AWS Param Store, which is exactly what we have typed here, and it's different to what we have as the default value that we define at the default value at the start. So we were able to successfully connect to the Param Store and actually go in and basically make a change. If we wanted to change it at any time, we just change the value within the Param Store, and then we'll be able to actually access and change those environment variables without any issues. And so this is very useful because now you don't have to go in and change the values within the UI and then rebuild the binary itself. It's just a matter of using some sort of configuration management service or app config service to actually make those changes, make those values, and just making sure that you have the connectivity portion of things correct. Just for a quick thing, and I'll probably do this in a future video, for if you're running things on the AWS ecosystem, so VPC, EC2, ECS, EKS, it's a little bit different, and you don't actually have to use your access key or secret access key. So there'll be a video that goes a little bit deeper into that to just give you a visual idea of what you have to do, but it's just related to IAM roles, so you don't have to worry about actually exposing your key to the world. So just a quick recap, we were able to build a Flogo project. We took we changed the values of different properties within the project to something that we've defined in AWS Param Store. We found out how to use the encryption ability within Flogo itself, how we define the values that are needed to connect to the AWS Param Store, and then also just to keep note that you technically don't have to encrypt the values of, let's say, your key and such like that, but it's highly suggested, and if you do, just make sure that you add the secret in all caps when you're doing that. So yeah, I hope this video was helpful. Look for the next video, so the one going over how to do this on AWS, but then also we'll also look on how to do app configuration with console. So take a look out for that when it comes out. Thank you.